Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is William Flick. I'm sitting in for Tom D'Ambra tonight. And I'd like to thank Tom for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. As we're speaking, we're recording this on a Wednesday morning. Mr. Trump is in the Vatican City. The Vatican City is a city-state similar to a section of London called the City, which is a city-state where all the bankers are. The Bank of England and the Vatican are basically running the financial sectors of the world. Wall Street, Fleet Street, and Shanghai, places like that cooperate with the city and the Vatican. The Vatican is basically a bank. I know everybody thinks it's the center of Catholicism, which it would appear to be, but it is basically a bank first. That's where all the gold is. The gold has been there for quite a while. From the United States. If it isn't there, it's at the Bank of International Settlement in Basel, Switzerland. So, being more on topic, current events, General Flynn is being slandered tremendously. It reminds me of the Ezra Pound case. Ezra Pound was a poet in the early 20th century, award-winning poet. And Ezra Pound had a problem with us going to war in Europe. By World War II, he was totally upset. And he went to Italy to broadcast to the troops to tell them to go back, that we didn't need to be fighting a war because the bankers were behind the war. It was a war for the banks and their agenda of a world government. Well, they got the United Nations because of it. But they rounded up Ezra Pound, and rather than put him on trial because he was a very famous person at the time, they put him in St. Elizabeth's Hospital and experimented on him with LSD. Pound's assertion that it was a banker's war was absolutely the truth. All wars are bankers' wars. Yes, it's to make money. It's to gain power. It's all about power. We've been at war now in the Middle East for quite a while, a decade and a half. And if you bring up not doing that, you're an appeaser. But the whole purpose of those wars is to take over the Middle East, the hardest place to rule and control in the world. Most of the countries in the world are on board with the world government. One that isn't is Russia. And you see the way they're being treated now. But it's only in the last couple of years. Michael Flynn stood up to Barack Obama and refused to shoot down Russian planes over Syria. And because he stood up to him, Barack Obama didn't bring charges against Flynn because that would have alerted the public that him and Hillary Clinton wanted to go to war with Russia over Syria. Flynn stood up, and now they're lambasting him in the press and in the political circles. Mr. Flynn saved our butts from World War III. And this is the way we treat him. Because he's not going along with the dog and pony show. But I find it interesting when they talk about meddling, Russian meddling in our election. We don't meddle. We might a little, but mostly we just overthrow countries. Like we did in Libya, like we're trying in Syria, like we did in Iraq, like we did in Afghanistan, like we did in Panama, like we tried to do in Nicaragua with the Contra rebels. And they were financed with drug money, so the Congress couldn't cut off the funding. And of course, nobody believes any of this. While they sell your kids heroin and then take the money to buy guns and finance who and whatever they want, wherever, to overthrow whoever. Now, after World War II, there was something called Operation Gladio. In Vietnam, it was Phoenix, Operation Phoenix. This is where they went around murdering political activists that didn't agree with the United States government's version of reality. Sort of like what's happening now in our country. If you don't go along with the government, there's something wrong with you. They have half the population believing that government is the end all for everything. But it isn't the end all. The end all of everything, exactly. The United States government is a de facto government, an unlawful entity. It's not my opinion, that's a fact. Ask a public official. They don't go by the Constitution. They haven't gone by it at least since the Civil War. How do I know that? Senate Report 93549 says that. The Constitution has been abridged. It's been more than abridged. And I'll tell you, I'll read my latest letter to the editor. It's called Your Rights Have Been Stolen. For hundreds of years, people in America dug gold out of the mountains and had the government press it into a coin to be used as currency. So it wasn't the government's gold, it was our gold, the people. And the term the people's money used to be used. Continuing. In 1913, our government entered into an impossible contract, a fraud. An impossible contract is one that can't be fulfilled. A fraud called the Federal Reserve Bank. The bank issued money and required that money to be returned, and interest for using that money was to be paid in gold. So they would put out the money, require that we return it after a certain period of time, and then charge interest for using that money, paid in gold. The gold was the people's money. So they created an impossible fraudulent contract, and then they stole the gold as an interest payment and gave back the pieces of paper. It wasn't even an equal trade. It was just a lending of pieces of paper and credit. And then we paid our substance, our physical gold, for their credit. See that palm? There's credit there. You see the credit? Credit it's fiction credit. The people were the financiers of the government and were considered to be the lawful owners of the government. We were the sovereigns. We were the kings. We were the sovereigns. When we stood in front of a judge, we were sovereign. The government worked for us. By 1933, the government couldn't raise enough gold to pay the interest on the Federal Reserve notes, so the government reneged on the obligation they agreed to. At the time, we were operating under common law, and under that law, if you didn't live up to your obligation as a debtor, your creditor took control of you until you fulfilled your promise to pay. The Congress passed HJR 192 in 1933, stating no more payments will be made in gold, and gold was called in not to be used as money from then on. When the gold was called in, our status as sovereigns was removed and we became corporations in a court of law. Let me read that again. When the gold was called in, our status as sovereigns was removed and we became corporations in a court of law. Now, because we paid for the government and with our money, it wasn't the government's money. We dug it out of the hills. We panned it in the rivers. We paid for the government out of our pockets. We were the owners of the government. Do you feel like an owner now? You aren't, because the Constitution isn't in play anymore. If we do not have the sovereign status, we are not. It is not applicable to us. The Constitution was set up for a sovereign people. They took that away in 1933 when they took our gold for their lousy credit paper. The gold was shipped to Europe, and all debt money system was set up using us and our earnings as collateral. The international bankers had our government use our birth certificates as a debt bond. If you have a birth certificate and it says in the lower left-hand corner in the scrolling, American Banknote Company, North Banknote Company, Midwest Banknote Company, or any other banknote company, that birth certificate, the original, not the copy that you got, the original was given to a bank as collateral for a loan by the government. Under law, there is a maxim. If you use someone else's property in a transaction, then whoever owns that property has a third-party claim against whatever was obtained with the third party's property. Under law, the term is hypothecation. It is a hidden lien. So because we use the banker's money, it's their property, as if you lent somebody something and they trade it for something else and you want to get that back that you lent them, they gave it to somebody else. You have a lien against whatever they got, whatever they traded for, because they used your property that you lent them. Well, that's how it works with the banks. So we have a hidden lien on everything we own, and they've taken our sovereign status away. Now, when I tell people about how they took our gold, and they say it doesn't matter, but they took your sovereign status. The government doesn't work for you anymore, you work for them. You're a corporation in the courtroom, not with a Bill of Rights, but with privileges granted by the government. This isn't my opinion. These are not my opinions. These are facts. This is what's going on. The banknote companies, backing up. By using the bank's all debt money, the banks have a claim against everything we think we own, including ourselves, our property, and children. The banknote companies that print the birth certificate bond are a division of the Office of Management and Budget of the Commerce Department. Commerce Department, trade, management and budget, money. Okay? So they print birth certificates. Why would the Commerce Department print birth certificates? It's simple, so they can get loans. They use us as the collateral. The Constitution for the United States no longer applied to us because our lawful status had changed from sovereign to corporation. That happened in the 1930s. Now, where did I learn this? I learned this from, originally, a retiring sheriff 20 years ago from Massachusetts. I was reading a friend of mine in a coffee shop, congressional record on how the gold was being shipped to Europe. And this law officer, a retiring sheriff, said, "Son, it's worse than what you're telling your friend." And he commenced to tell me everything I just wrote in this letter. How we don't own anything. The banks own everything, including us. Right, so I drive cab in St. Johnsbury. I've had several lawyers in my car. I play in a band, and I played for a whole party of lawyers one time. They all admitted bits and pieces of this letter. They admitted bits and pieces of this letter because this letter is true. Now, most people can't probably fathom what I'm talking about. Because why? Because they don't teach us about any of this stuff unless you pay a large fee to become part of the club that is screwing over the people of the world, and especially the United States. I also learned this information from an IMF, International Monetary Fund, whistleblower named Karen Udis. Also explained this phenomenon in an interview I heard her give. She spoke of how they use the birth certificates as collateral for the loans. I don't know if she's still alive. I'm sure she's on some kind of list for doing that. Former Congressman James Traficant alludes to much of this information in his 1993 speech in Congress called The Bankruptcy of the United States. Mr. Traficant tells the story of how we accepted credit and gave them substance. Credit is make-believe. Gold is real. We gave them something of substance for something that didn't exist. A former member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a Rockefeller think tank, also admitted much of the same information to me. His name was Harry Barnes, a former ambassador to Romania and Chile. Mr. Harry Barnes, God bless him. He told me the truth. He told me there was a conspiracy. He knew there wasn't much I, as a single person, could do about it. These people, I've had friends say to me, "Oh, if there was a conspiracy, someone would try to blow the whistle." Not if they're getting enough money to keep their mouth shut. Every lawyer is. The lawyers are on the side of the conspiracy. The bankers are on the side of the conspiracy. Some of them don't realize it, but they know they're creating money out of thin air when they make a loan. They couldn't make that loan without your signature. So in reality, ladies and gentlemen, you're creating the loan through your signature. Now, if you get into the middle of a bankruptcy case, I would say you bring up to the judge that the bank never came to the table with consideration. In a lawful term, consideration means anything of value. The bank came in, entered into the mortgage with you. They did not give you money. They gave you your credit that was created through your signature. Now, you tell that judge that the bank didn't give you any money, that they used your signature to create credit out of thin air. But the whole problem with the credit situation is that when you pay it back as the principal, the initial loan, they erase that money out of existence, shrinking the money supply while the prices are higher from them putting out more money. The prices go up as they put out more money. Then if they slow the loan rate through several ways, I won't confuse you with all, but they will slow the new money coming back in as they erase the money out of existence. We go into a recession / depression. So what I'm saying is more money is being returned to the bank and being erased out of existence than there is new money being created. Realize that money, according to a woman that was on the Federal Reserve Boston Board of Trustees, an economist, told me that money is nothing but ledger entries. A bank will tell you they have $1 million in reserve. They will only have probably something like $100,000 actually. The other 900,000 will just be on ledger sheets. Can you say fraud? Can you say big lie? So that's basically what I wanted to say on the money situation. Now, as far as the foreclosure, if you find somebody you know is in a foreclosure, you find yourself in a foreclosure, the mortgage has been sold to a mortgage holding company. The bank gets all the money they would have got from you, all the points, all the interest, everything goes to the bank that you made your mortgage with. The mortgage goes to the mortgage holding company. The bank is satisfied by the mortgage holding company for the mortgage. But do they tell you that? No. They tell you, you have to keep paying them while they've already been paid by the mortgage holding company. Now you have to ask, why would the mortgage holding company want a mortgage that you're not going to give them the money for? Because when the mortgage holding company gets the mortgage, that's an asset. Say it's a $200,000 mortgage. They can take and make 10 times more credit than the mortgage itself. $200,000 will become $2 million. That's why they don't care for your pittance of pennies every week. But the local bank that made the mortgage does. So when you get in to the situation in a court of law, you bring up that you will vacate the property if they can show you a mortgage with your name, your signature on it, the original mortgage. They don't, most banks don't have it. They sold the mortgage. Now, so you can bring up the fact that they never came with consideration, anything of value to the table, that it was a fraud. And then you can also bring up that they sold the mortgage and that you'd like to see the mortgage with your signature, the original mortgage with your signature on it. All right. Thirdly, what you could try in a case in a courtroom is to bring up the fact, if there's no jury and you're there on say not a foreclosure, but on a traffic charge, a minor misdemeanor, something of lesser consequence. You bring up the fact, you say, if they say, are you ready to plead? You say, Your Honor, I'm ready to plead, but I only have one question. And you ask the judge, do you work for the state? He'll say, yes. You ask the judge, does the police officer that's charging me work for the state? He'll say, yes. You say to him, I came in here for a fair and impartial hearing. How can I get a fair and impartial hearing when the two of you both work for the entity bringing the charges against me? This is not a trivial thing to bring up. A court of law without a jury is not a court of law. It's a kangaroo court. When you go before a judge and they can make a determination based on another person that works for the same entity, it's all BS. I want to read you a little letter by George Washington. Now, this is from 1798. He's writing to Reverend G.W. Snyder. And I'll skip the first paragraph. He says, "It was not my intention to doubt that the doctrines of the Illuminati and the principles of Jacobinism had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more fully satisfied of this fact than I am." George Washington is talking about the Illuminati. You know, the thing that's only in movies, just in movies, right? Ladies and gentlemen, the Illuminati is real. In the Bank of England is a 33rd degree Mason Lodge. I had a book, 200 years old. It was written in 1798 by a member of the Illuminati that had dropped out. His name is John Robison. The book's name was Proof of a Conspiracy. In it were 6 planks of the Communist Manifesto. So the Freemasons are behind communism. And the Freemasons, at the highest level, are all rich industrialists or financiers or royalty. These are the people that are running the show in the United States. The Illuminati. Here's Black's Law Dictionary, 6th edition. De facto government, one that maintains itself by a display of force against the will of the rightful legal government and is successful, at least temporarily, in overturning the institutions of the rightful legal government by setting up its own in lieu thereof. So ask any public official, lawyer, judge, anybody in a position of power if we're a de facto government. We do not go by the law, we're de facto. We're an unlawful government. Okay, I brought along today a couple of New American magazines. There's a picture here in it of a woman named Sharyl Attkisson. Sharyl Attkisson was looking into Benghazi for CBS News, and she was close to the truth. So the government hacked into her computer and put classified material on her computer so she could be held accountable and forced in a position where she would have to keep her mouth shut about what she learned. And what did she learn? She learned that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton put together ISIS so they could overthrow Gaddafi and stop Muammar Gaddafi from building a central bank for the continent of Africa based on his 144 tons of gold. Former Congressman Walter Fauntroy out of Washington, D.C. tells exactly that story. So, this magazine has a story also. It's on hacking and how the CIA, I'll show you this here. CIA may be hacking cars to murder people. The fact that the CIA kills hundreds, if not thousands, of people a year is not news. What is of interest, however, is that the CIA might be killing via hacking car computers. All right, we kill people based on metadata, boasted former CIA and NSA boss Michael Hayden in 2014. All right? He's admitting they use the computers and data they have on people, and they kill them. In 1975, it emerged in Senate testimony as part of an investigation into the lawless scheming of the CIA that the agency had developed a gun that shoots an ice dart. The frozen projectile would enter the body and cause a heart attack upon melting, leaving virtually no evidence of the crime. Now, this goes back when Ron Brown, Commerce Secretary, I saw him in an interview right after it was disclosed that he had $750,000 from Vietnam placed in his account. He was the Commerce Secretary under Bill Clinton. He was formerly the DNC chairman, Democratic National Committee chairman. Ron Brown, according to a gentleman named Cogswell, I believe was his last name, he was a medical examiner, found a hole in Ron Brown's head, and the medical examiner said the only way it could have been, only thing it could have been was an ice pellet. So it goes right along with this article. Ron Brown was assassinated because he was going to blow the whistle on all the drug running that was going on through Mena by way of Mena Air Force, Air Base, not an Air Force base, just a landing field. Mena Air Base. The drugs were flowing through there. Clinton was in on it. Bush was in on it, Bush Sr. They're all involved. They're bringing in the heroin, destroying our country, making people helpless and hopeless. That's what they want. They shipped all the jobs overseas. Oh yeah, the Democrats are for the working man. That's why they sent all the jobs overseas, huh? It wasn't just Republicans doing it. Bill Clinton signed NAFTA. Clinton was running the drugs in. Clinton started leaving the borders wide open. And they've been open in the last 3 or 4 presidents, under the last 3 or 4 presidents. We are being had. It says in this picture, in this article, journalist Michael Hastings died in a suspicious car accident as he worked on stories exposing CIA and NSA crimes. Okay? Michael Hastings. He was a journalist. The picture says this was not an accident. I know you can't see it. It's in the New American, April 17th edition. All right. New American Magazine, May 8th. It's on fake news. The article says, Deep State in Fake News. The recent presidential contest made clear that the mainstream media is biased, but the bigger story is the extent to which the intelligence community took a role in the campaigning. So they're worried about Russia, but even our intelligence services were involved in the campaign. They were on the side of the Democrats. So this whole article here, Finding Fake News. Clark, David Clark, Sheriff David Clark, he says, the hands up, don't shoot lie was propagated by every mainstream liberal media across the country. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, Chicago Tribune, CNN, MSNBC, all propagated that hands up, don't shoot lie. It was from that time forward that this concept of fake news was talked about. So, there's an article in here about CIA's Mockingbird and ruling class journalists. We're being lied to. We're being lied to all the time, all the time. And you're buying it. You're buying it. They'll tell you a story, they'll leave out huge facts. I'll give you a for instance. Sometimes they do it right in, like documentaries. I was watching PBS, which is suspect. Oh, all you lefties out there, you love PBS, is just so wonderful. Well, there was a special on penguins at the South Pole, and they went to the western side. There's a bay, and the temperature of the ocean water there is 6 degrees above the rest of the ocean. And they were watching the shelves along that area fall off, melt and fall off into the ocean. And where are these penguins going to go? And it was all this big deal about that. Well, I have a DVD where they take and they drop a bathyscaphe down into that bay off the coast of Antarctica. And in the bottom of that bay is an active volcano. An active volcano. Do you think PBS would tell the people that were watching the ice melt and fall into the ocean? No. Why? Because they're part of the big lie. Is there global warming? Probably. Probably. Is it your car? No, it's not. No, it's not. The Pacific Ocean has a ring of fire, volcanoes all around it. And those volcanoes are heating up the ocean. The ocean, the Pacific Ocean, creates our weather system. Comes in off the Pacific, goes across our country. They have the ability, excuse me, to heat up the upper atmosphere, the ionosphere, and move the jet stream that comes in around Washington State and dips down through the country. They have the ability to move that. A few years back, they moved it over. It came in and then dipped down in the U.S. almost halfway through the country. It was called the polar vortex. They're good at picking up and creating new names that'll baffle you. I have an article from Popular Science on the HAARP program. It's the program how they heat the upper atmosphere, the ionosphere. And it says in the article, it's from Popular Science in 1995, September 95, manipulating weather. There are people that maintain they can put it at such a low frequency it can manipulate your mind. Now, Wall Street Journal, November 13, 1997, page A19, has a headline, Malaysia to battle smog with cyclones. Okay? Malaysia to battle smog with cyclones. You think that's CO2 creating those cyclones? The Russians were renting Malaysia a device that could create electromagnetically a cyclone. You think they're not fooling around with the weather? It's crazy. So they're just about always lying to us. Here. This is our flag. You'll notice the similarity to the British East India Company flag. I was in the library in Littleton several years ago, and I saw a book on flags. It must have saw me. I grabbed it. It opened right up to the first page, had our flag. It had this flag with the circle of stars, but instead of stars, it had gold crosses. The gold crosses are Knights Templar symbols. The Knights Templar set up the city of London. Our flag is essentially the British East India Company flag. Okay? Now, I have a speech here by Charles Lindbergh, and he's speaking of the trusts control some of the newspapers and have them in other agencies at work. These libel, slander, and hatch up all sorts of schemes in the hopes to start the people themselves to making unfavorable comments about members whom the trusts want to remove. Okay? They buy up all the newspapers. Louis McFadden. Did you hear about it? It's not in the newspapers of that day. I checked. I went to microfilm. There was nothing about them buying up the newspapers to get the people to go along with the creation of the Federal Reserve. Here's Louis McFadden, a representative, Resolution 158. He's bringing charges against the Federal Reserve Board. He's telling how they're shipping our gold to the Bank of England and to the Vatican. Not a word in any newspaper. Not a word. Not a word. You think you're getting the truth? Those people that you think are your friends on television. I'm not talking about the locals, although I'm sure there are people in their organizations at the higher level that understand what's going on and aren't saying a word about it. We're being lied to all the time. Here, the Hitler Project. I got this out of a book called The Unauthorized Biography of George Bush. It talks about how we were financing and hiding Hitler's money on Wall Street by way of Brown Brothers Harriman, who was owned by the Harrimans and the Bush family. You didn't see that in the newspaper. No, you didn't. No. No. Now, this stuff has been going on for a long time. I would say do your homework. You're not going to get it handed to you. I'm doing the best I can to tell you about it. But people still resist. Who am I? You know? Lawyers, sheriff, ambassadors, you name it. I've been told by the highest officials I can get next to. They will confide in me. Here's a little ad out of the Nation magazine, January 1995. World government begins with 70% of Earth included. Talking about the oceans. World government. They want you to send money to an organization that's promoting world government. Was that the lead-off story? When Mr. Trump talks about any of that stuff, he's ridiculed. Or anybody talks about it. You're with the terrorists. If they can't get you with that, they'll hit you with, you're a bigot, you're a racist, you're a homophobe, a xenophobe. I get hit with that one all the time. Ladies and gentlemen, my partner of 15 years was a Spanish woman. I'm currently seeing a woman from Brazil. I'm a xenophobe? Xenophobe? My best friend in high school played saxophone in my soul band. I hung out with him constantly. He was gay. Homophobe? These are convenient terms so they can knock you down, wear you out. Here, I go over to the Secretary of State's office, and I was inquiring of the archivist, Jeffrey Sanford. Gregory Sanford, the archivist. I said to him, I'm looking into the Illuminati. I'd like to know why we had to have a Freeman's Oath to be able to vote in Vermont. I asked him if the files concerning the debate for implementing the Freeman's Oath were available. He said no, they were burned in a fire. They were shipped to New York because of a flood, and when they were in New York, they were burned in a fire. I'll bet you the Freemasons burned those records of that debate. And when I told him I was looking into the Illuminati, he handed me a book called Towards a Christian Republic, Anti-Masonry and the Great Transition in New England. You know all about this, don't you? Because your newspaper and your television have told you, haven't they? This is just absolute nonsense that's going on in this country and the world. Okay? What I want you to do is get a copy of the Communist Manifesto, Fifth Plank, Central Bank. Why would they do that? So the bankers own everything and everybody else doesn't. If you use their money, they own what you think you own. Now, here's a book called Compromised, written by Terry Reid, who was one of the pilots that were flying drugs into Mena, Arkansas. From Mena, Arkansas to the White House, how the presidency was co-opted by the CIA. Of course it was. George Sr. Bush was the CIA director when Jimmy Carter came to office. They were so worried that Carter would expose their dirty deeds, they moved their black operations to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia. Where were the pilots on 9/11, 14 of them from? The hijackers. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia. Okay. Here's an article I pulled out of the Boston Globe about a gentleman named Danny Casolaro, Was Ryder the victim of a D.C. conspiracy? They murdered him. They murdered him because he was looking into the Bank of Commerce and Credit International when it collapsed. They murdered him to shut him up. Mr. Casolaro's brother was a doctor. Before he could get to Martinsburg, West Virginia, where they found the body in a bathtub, they had embalmed the body so his brother, who was a doctor, couldn't examine it and determine if anything was injected into him. So I have an article here from the Nation, and it's all about the drug running in Arkansas. You know, a gentleman by the name of Gary Webb was on a radio show one night. He had a article called Dark Alliance in San Jose Mercury News out of San Jose, California. And I asked him if the drug running in the United States through the CIA in compliance with all the other secret services around, is this connected to the British East India Company Opium War drug running? He said, absolutely. The same families with more and more people joining in at the highest levels. So they're destroying us on the bottom so they can make all this money, and then they use it to further create their world government and whatever else they're involved in. Michael Levine had a book out called White Lies. He's a U.S. Customs agent. Mike Rupert, LAPD narcotics agent. He said the CIA came to him and wanted him to go along with spreading the crack cocaine in L.A. He has a book out called Crossing the Rubicon. Catherine Austin Fitz worked at Dillon Reed. She was the Undersecretary of HUD. She says she knows firsthand that at least $500 billion to $1 trillion washes through Wall Street of drug money. Drug money. Colonel Bo Greitz, James Bo Greitz. I had a video of him, highest decoration. He was in Burma, speaking with Kun Sa, the guy that ran Burma in the late 80s until they got rid of him. He said, he asked him, name somebody in the United States government that is engaged in drug running. Kun Sa said, Richard Armitage. Mr. Armitage went to the Congress when we invaded Afghanistan and got money, $250 million, to fund the Northern Alliance, the people who are planting and growing the poppies in Afghanistan. And now Afghanistan, according to the UN, is #1 heroin state in the world. So, are you aware of any of this? Why? Because the mainstream media isn't telling you the truth. They're telling you half-truths. They're misleading you, making sure you don't know any of the stuff I know. Well, Tom D'Ambra knows. I know. And more people are waking up. I'd like to thank Tom for letting